Hello everyone, welcome to part one of connecting MVC application to database. This is without using the entity framework, so just manual SQL statements that you can use to manipulate your data inside the database. So for this demonstration, I will be using Microsoft SQL Server and connect my database with my application or the MVC application that I've already created. So this is a simple MVC application. Nothing has been done with all the default folders and default files. So I'm just going to go ahead to my SQL Management Studio. Alright, now I'm here on my SQL Management Studio. So this is where I will be creating my database. So at the moment, I will just be using a local database. So for the sake of time, I have created a script that you can also use. So I'll just create my database based on that script. So let me quickly grab the script. Alright, so I'm just gonna copy this and into my SQL database management studio. So I'm gonna go ahead and say new query. So first, let me create the database. Alright, so this has been successful. I can get rid of that line and change to my database there. Right. So this is just a simple script. It's about student modules and lectures. So some basic relationships between those three entities. And just gonna refresh here. Now I have my database. I'm gonna open a new query and select all from, just gonna choose one table, and I have students or student modules. Right, so there we go. Oh, I think it's students. There we go. Right, so this is the data that I have. So I'm actually done here. So I'm not gonna do anything else. So I can just flip to Visual Studio. Right, now I'm on my Visual Studio. So the first thing that I will try to do is to connect to the server. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on View and go to Server Explorer. And on data connection, I'll just click to connect to database. So I'm going to connect to the database that I've created on my local server. So I'm just going to type my local DB, or if you want, you can go to your SQL Management Studio and copy the server name. Able to connect there. So I'm going to grab this one and go back to my Visual Studio. I paste it there and search for the database. Right, so that's the one that I'm looking for, test connection. Right, connection is good. And okay. So let me just wait for it to refresh. Right, so This my server. So mean I can manage my database directly from Visual Studios. As you can see, all my tables are here, all that. So let me open a new query here. Alright, so I'm just gonna write a simple select statement. Select all from, is it lectures? I think so. Let's execute that. Right. So this is fine. Don't say. Right. So let's clean up our application. Alright, so I'm just gonna get rid of the default files that was created, likes of the home controller and all the views related to that controller. So first, I will just remove that. So getting rid of the home controller, and let me go to the views and get rid of the home folder, because I won't be using these views, and then delete that. Go. Right. Now on my right, so I'm just going to start with the models folder. So I'll just create a very simple class that will contain this student information. Right. So I'm going to go to models and add a new class. This is a student class. Right, I have my student class. So I think you can also see table definition here to get the data types, right? Right, so I have this, okay, student ID, so all of them are vouchers, and teacher. All right, so let's go back to our class. So I'm just going to create three properties. I'm just going to use auto implemented properties. So first, that will be a string, and this will be student ID, and then string, let's call it first name, string last name. user type. And in case here the user type will be equals to 3. That's a type of student. Right, then I want to create two constructors. So this will be the default constructor, and then I'm going to create an overloaded constructor. So to speed this thing up, I will just hold Alt and then Enter for quick actions. Then generate constructor. Then I will unselect that. Right. So I'm just going to use this for creating a new object. Right. I don't have. You can put default values if you want. I'm not going to put any default values for now. Right. So this is what I have, and I will just save that. Right. Now this is what I have. So we have the models there, we have the controllers views. So we want to include some sort of a database management file, so where we can have our SQL statements. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder. So in this folder I will have our database logic, right? So I'm going to have a class that will just contain our database logic. I'm going to go ahead and say class, and what should we call this? Let's just call it DB layer. Right, so this is where we'll have all our SQL statements. Right, so I'll just save this for now. Right, so we also need views. Right, so at the moment we don't have any views, and we also need a controller whereby we will send information to different views. So we'll start off with a student view. Right, so first let me add a controller. So this will be a student controller. Oops. Let me go back and add controller. Alright, so I will just choose controller with read and write actions. And then I will call this student. Student controller. Right, so let me save that. And now I just want to add a connection string to my application. So this is where we define our connection string. So you go to app settings.json. That's where you'll define your connection strings. Now let me go back to the server explorer, and then if I open that data connections, this will be the database. So if you right click there and open properties, you will have a connection string there. So I'm going to grab that, so copy that connection string, and then I'll have to add it on my JSON file. So let me just do this. I'm going to say comma, and I'll start a new section for connection strings, and then I only have one connection string, so I'll just say there, and I will call it local db connect, then colon, and then I'll have to specify my connection string. So I'm going to paste my connection string here. There's my connection string. Right. So that's what I have. So I'll save and then close that. And then, okay, I'm going to close that as well. Okay, this one is fine. Right, now let's go back to our controller. Right. So when you come to our controller, we want to add a view. So to start things off, we'll just display a list of all students. So I'm going to right click here and say add view. Now I'm going to select the eraser view and say add. Right, so you can keep it as index or change the name if you want. So I'm just going to leave it as index. And the template that I'm going to use is a list. So I'm just going to display a list of students. Then I need to choose the class, right? So the model will be student. So I'm choosing student so that this view will be scaffolded with all the attributes that are inside the student model. So say add. So now it will scaffold this. So let's wait for the scaffolding process to complete. Right, our scaffolding process is completed. Now so this is our view. Now let's go to our data, right? So database layer. Now in here, we need to create some SQL statements and also get libraries that we can use for SQL data client, right? So I'm just gonna grab the models folder, models there, right? So we need to use system.data.sql client, right? Using system.data, right? Now we have our connection tree inside the app settings.json. So that's where we have our connection tree. So we need a variable that can come and fetch this connection string from the app settings. So while we are here, I'm going to create two variables. First one will be a string, and this will be our connection string, right? And then the second variable that we need is actually the one that will help us get this connection string, right? And the purpose of this string variable will store this entire string, right? But how can we get it from this file? Because this is not just a normal class, it's a JSON file. That's where you can store all your connection strings. So we need a variable of type iConfiguration, right? I'm just gonna call it config, right? So this will actually help us to get any configuration that we have inside our app settings.json, right? So I'm gonna create a constructor now. right? And then in this constructor, I'm going to pass the I configuration and configuration, right? Now, for us to use these SQL statements, because we will have methods either to add a student, delete, insert, all those crude functionalities. So we will have to reference actually reference this class, but then for this to be success, this will have to be executed. So this constructor will obviously be executed. Now this way we will initialize or give initial values to our two instance variables. So the first one will be the config. So equals to the configuration, whatever that I have in the parameters. And then the connection string now will be equals to, from the configuration dot get connection strings. But then this takes a string, so I'm going to pass the name of my connection string here. So let me go to app settings, and then I get the name of the connection string. So you can actually store multiple connection strings. I only have one, so I'm going to get that name and pass it there, right? So now this should be done with regards to the constructor. Now when it comes to our controller, so the purpose of the index action is to actually return the list of all students. So we need a method that can grab all the students from the database and will make use of this action to get all the students, right? So let's go ahead and create a method. So this method will have to return a list of type student, right? And then we can say all students. Then this does not take any parameters. So the purpose of this method is to return a list. So I'm going to create a list variable of type student. And then I'm going to call it st_list equals to new list of type student. And then before I forget, let me return st_list. Alright, so that's what I have. Now, for me to connect to the database, I will need an SQL connection. Alright, let's see if we need an extra namespace here using Microsoft dot okay, I might have to install this one. Okay, let me go to my NuGet package manager and grab the names or the package. So I'm going to go to browse Microsoft Microsoft.data.sql client. And then accept. Right. So I'm just going to build this solution. I'll go back to my database layer and see if I can get that using Microsoft.data.sql client. Right. So I need SQL connection. Right. I'm gonna call this my connection equals to new SQL connection. Let me just get rid of that. Now this takes so you can take a default one or it can pass a connection string. So which variable contains our connection string? It's con string. There we go. And now the second thing that I need is the actual SQL command. But then this is what we actually need. So I'm gonna go ahead and open a new query. So if I say select all from students, I'm gonna do that. So we need a variable that can actually convert these results into a table or a variable that C# can understand, or actually our framework can understand. Because if you run this SQL statement, it's actually just results that we get back. So we need to store this inside a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and create an SQL data adapter. So the purpose of the SQL data adapter is to actually convert the results into a table. Right. So I'm going to call this my adapter equals to new SQL data adapter. And now this can take, you can either make a default or it can take a select command, right? Because that should be a query. So you can run your update and all that. So what we'll need to do, we need to pass the string and the connection string. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pass the command or the string and the connection, right? So let me do that. So in here I can specify my connection string, not connection string rather, but the select statement. So select all from students. I think that's what we have. Students, yes. And then comma. The second required parameter is my connection. My connection there. So my connection, and then I need a data table. Okay, equals to new data table. Now, while I'm inside the data table, I will need a variable that can hold each and every row. So I'm gonna loop through the entire table, and then when I get to the first row, I need to store the entire row inside a variable. And while I'm at that, I need a variable that will store each and every column from that row. So to achieve that, I will make use of a data row. Then I will just connect my row. Right, so this will just be a variable that will store each and every row from that table. So when I'm done, I'm just going to open my connection, and now I'm going to make use of the adapter so that I can convert whatever results that will be brought back by this statement into my table. So to do that, I need to call my adapter and then call the fill method. And then this can either take a data set, a data table, or whatever that you might be using. So I'm using a table, so I'm gonna call my table, right? Now, at this point, my table will be filled with the results that will be brought back by this statement, all right? So remember, if you select anything from the database, you can either get data or not get the data based on your select statement, right? So we will make use of a check first. So we'll say if my table, so now we want to check if data will be returned. So if my table dot rows dot count is actually greater than 0. So meaning, did I get any results back? So if I get records back, it means the number of rows will be greater than 0. If that's the case, then I can make use of this data row to say store whatever that is inside each row inside this variable. All right. So I'm going to make use of a for loop. So I'm going to make use this as my loop control variable. All right. So index, this will represent the index of each row. So now I'm going to go to my table and then call the rows.count. So depending on how many rows are there, right? So this is what I can do. I have how many variables? I have string, name. I'm just gonna make last name, ID, and int type. So I'm just gonna make that. So if this is the case, we need to call the row. Now row will go to my table, right? And then get a row at position I. So one way of looking at this is that a table is an array of rows. So it will go to a specific row at that position. And then while I'm at that, I can go inside the row. So meaning if I'm here, I can go inside each and every row and grab a column. So this will also make use of an index, column 0, 1, 2, 3. So index 0, 1, 2, and then 3. So I need to get the student ID and then name, surname, and then user type. So I'm going to go back there. So I can simply say, let's see, I think the first one, okay, index 0 will be the ID. I'm going to say ID equals to now my row, and I'm going to call a specific position. I'm going to call a specific, let me just type this right. My row, I'm going to call a specific position, which is 0, right? Right, so at the moment it's actually saying we cannot really confirm. So remember, this comes from a database table, which is called a data table. Now we know the value or the data type of the value that can be stored inside that table can either be string, int, or whatever the case might be. But then what is the actual type of the column? All right, so you might want to convert the type of the column so that it stores a specific type of data. So we want to store a string, so we will have to cast this to a string. So I'm going to cast to a string, right? Now the next thing that I need to go and grab is name. So same process. I will cast this to a string and then call my row and then add position 1. And then what else? Last name. And then my row. And then add position 2. And then the last one will be ID. My row at position 3. Oh, so this will be an int. Oh, I don't have to int here. So I'll actually convert the number to be a string. Right. So once we are done with that, now the next step is to actually create an object and then add that object into a list, then return a list. It's a bit of a long process, but that's what we need. So I can create a student object, student st equals to new student. Now I'm going to make use of my overloaded constructor. Now the first thing that I need to specify is the student ID. Yeah, ID. So ID, and then I use the name, and then I use the last name, and then something I need. Right, and then st list dot add st. Right, so each time you create a student object, you add it to a list, and then at the end of the loop, or at the end outside the if statement, you will then return that. Okay, now obviously this can be minimized to one line of code. So what I'm going to do, instead of creating individual variables and storing that into a list or storing that into an object, I can just say st, or when it says st list dot add, I'm going to say new new student. Right, so new student, and then instead of doing that, we can just grab these individual items. I'm going to say the first one is an ID, my first name, and then last name. And last name. So we can get rid of that. And then remember, the user type by default, it will be 3. So we don't have to specify that here. Alright, so that's what we have. And select all from students. So to make sure that our statement works, just to confirm. Right, so that's correct. And now when I'm done, I will have to close the connection. So my connection dot close. Right, so my connection dot close. Right, let me save that. And I think at the moment we should be fine on the database layer as far as this method is concerned. So we can just go back to our controller and try to test it. All right, so now we are inside our controller. Now remember, our code is inside a DB layer class. So we need to call this method. So inside our controller, we will create an object of that class, or we'll create a variable of that type. So I'm going to say DB layer. I'm just going to call this DB helper, right? And then we need to create a constructor. And then inside the constructor, I'm going to make use of the I configuration and call this config, right? Why do we need this? Because the constructor of this class takes the I configuration, right? So I'm going to say DB helper equals to new DB layer and pass that config right there. Right, and then we should be fine. And now when we get to the index method, let's try to return list. So what we can do, we can say a list of type, right? We don't have the models folder here. All right, so using what models, then this will be of type student. Yes, student st_list equals to new, actually not new, but we're going to fill this with whatever that is being returned by the all students method. So db helper dot all students, then return the view with the st list. Return the view with the st list because we created our index page with a model. So we need a model, and the type or the template that has been used here is a list. So we're going to pass a list of type student. Right, so a couple of things that we need to maybe check. Now remember, we get rid of the home controller and the home folder. So let's go to our program.cs and actually change the pattern. So we no longer have the home controller, we now have the student controller. So I'm going to make use of the student controller. Change that, and then okay, this I can close, it's fine. So if I execute this application, I'm just going to go to build and then build a solution just to scan through if there's if everything is in order. All right, so build just succeeded. So I'm just going to run this and see if we can get the data. All right, so for the first time it's going to take a while, so let's just wait for that. Right, so here's our data. So we are able to connect to our database, and if I can flip to my SQL Server Explorer, or actually SQL Server Management Studio. Then let me open a new query, and then run that there. So this is our data. Yeah. So we're able to fetch the data from our database. Right, so that's all for this video. So here we're creating an MVC application and connecting it to the database, and one SQL statement that we have covered is the select and a couple of helpers from SQL client provider. Right, so that's all from me. Stay tuned for the next video or next videos on other CRUD operations, including your update, delete, and insert. All right. For now, thank you and bye bye.